When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers!
Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figure it out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Offers require port and of number not currently active on T-Mobile network. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 40p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.
Run to Old Navy to celebrate summer style your way. Now through Tuesday, rush in for $2 tanks for women and girls, $4 tees for the whole family, $6 graphic tees, and $8 shorts. Ready to dive in? All swimwear is 50% off. Save big on the best summer styles for just $2, $4, $6, and $8 now through Tuesday. Plus, this Friday only, women's dresses are just $10. Run to Old Navy. Valid 6/22 to 6/28. Dresses valid 6/24. Select styles. Exclusions apply. See store for details.
Welcome to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast, your source for solutions-focused dialogue about race in America, with your host, Scott Speed.
Hello, and welcome to the RaceHavenPodcast. This is solutions-focused dialogue about race in America. My name is Scott Speed, and I am the facilitator of the dialogue. This is episode 15 of Race Haven, and today I am joined by my co-host, John Costino. How are you doing today, John?
I'm doing great, my friend. How are you?
I am doing awesome. Today we're going to dialogue about several topics, including polarizing debates on social media, the Root series remake, and more. But first, I want to tell you why we believe that dialogue is greater than debate. And this is how we start out every show. You see, in debate, there can only be one winner. In dialogue, participants work together towards collective solutions, win-wins. For example, dialogue respects all the other participants and seeks not to alienate or offend. In contrast, debate rebuts contrary positions and may belittle or deprecate other participants. See, we like to start out each show with that because what John and I attempt to do on this show is model dialogue. So I think that it's important to give the example of the contrast between dialogue and debate, because if you, the listener, are like me, when I went to school growing up, we had debate clubs and we had debates in class, but very rarely did we have dialogue. Very rarely were the benefits and mechanisms of dialogue ever taught to us. So therefore, we live in a society today where there's a lot of polarization, a lot of arguments, a lot of debates, and the skill of actually dialoguing and listening to one another and coming towards collective solutions is not something that we find very often. So John and I put on this show in an attempt to model what that looks like, in hopes that, you know, we can do our part to bring about peace and harmony in America in terms of racial and ethnic diversity. So with that being said, here's the framework for authentic dialogue during this show and what you'll hear. So participants listen with a sense of curiosity and ask questions to uncover the underlying assumptions and beliefs behind someone's statements. Participants are willing to communicate their thoughts openly and honestly while putting aside emotions, defensiveness, and a desire to be right. Participants approach someone who sees a problem different, not as an adversary, but as a colleague in common pursuit of better solutions. So welcome to the dialogue. I hope everyone's ready, and we're going to jump into today's first topic. So, John, I want to start out with this. Every day, millions of Americans turn on their favorite news channels, their favorite radio stations, and or they read about the latest issues on their favorite news websites and blogs. Then some will flip the channel to another media outlet to hear or read the quote-unquote other side of an issue. Then many will share their favorite media outlet's message on social media and then go on to argue their quote-unquote side. Now, the interesting thing is when they're arguing their side, the other person that they're arguing with has probably read about the same issue but from their slanted viewpoint based on the media outlet that they consume. And this idea, John and I spoke about, like this idea about there actually being the need to have another viewpoint on the news, because news is supposed to be factual. So why do individuals listening to hear the different sides and point of views? We find that very interesting. And then in terms of, having facts and education, everyone's bringing their facts, their education, but from their polarizing viewpoint. So because of this, you see and hear arguments within families, by the water coolers at work. And for me and someone like John, entrepreneurs who primarily work from home, we see it on social media. All the time we see these polarizing arguments. So my question to you, John, and I want to frame it by letting our listeners know that last week I posted the episode 14 of Race Haven on Facebook, and immediately some of the contributors, some of my Facebook friends and Race Haven group members began to argue just about the question that was posed in the description of the show, but they didn't even have enough time to actually listen to the show before the comments started, rolling, and it got pretty heated. It actually got kind of ugly, and I start out by asking you this, John. Why are people so invested in being right?
It's a great question, Scott, and obviously you and I, I'll call it witnessed. We witnessed that exchange back and forth, and obviously you and I have spoken a little bit about that offline. For me, it's frustrating. We see it in all aspects of life where most people, just in everyday conversation between friends, it's almost as if they don't take the time to listen. They just wait for the chance to speak again, and they're not trying to understand. They're trying to be understood. And it takes on, as you said, a very ugly tone when you bring a real issue in and then make it worse when it's not, a friendly conversation between friends. It's dialogue that turns to debate between strangers with different points of view. So I'll say that in the long answer to your question, and I know I do that a lot, we have this inert need to be validated, and it's weird because we shouldn't be looking for the external validation. It shouldn't be about trying to change your point of view or change your mind or change your perspective. We should be comfortable enough with our own intelligence, our own awareness, and simply offer it as a perspective to share, not with this intense need to convince or change somebody else's perspective. And I don't know where it begins. I think maybe it starts as kids when we start to have these debates with our parents about staying up late or going outside or whatever. But, yeah, it's a terrible investment that we all have in ourselves, I think.
And I try to wrap my mind around these concepts of, and I don't want to offend anyone, but I want this show to be authentic. So oftentimes the arguments that I see are between people who consider themselves conservative versus people who consider themselves. And for anyone who's listening, if you've listened to this show before, or if you're new, I'll share this with you that I don't identify with either. I don't identify with anything. I literally just think of myself as a critical thinker and someone who's interested in learning about you. That's who I am, and I'm interested in building and dialoguing, getting to know other solutions-oriented people, no matter your beliefs. I guess that's the best way to sum up my belief. So, with that being said, I never really could grasp why people would hold on to their point of view as if it is the only way to be right. And I struggle with when I see it, that people hold on to their point of view as if it's the only way to be right. I mean, literally, there are smart people, intelligent people, accomplished people who would fall on one side or the other within these two polarizing worlds that our country is pretty much set up. Just through our political system, our country has been set up for those two perspectives to dominate. In our media and our political system, which pretty much, obviously, the media controls the messaging. So we have our progressive networks and we have our conservative networks and radio stations. in blogs, in magazines, etc. So everything gets filtered in the world through those two eyes and those two mediums. And yes, there are alternative viewpoints, but those are pretty much underground. So with that being said, I just have a hard time with understanding why, even if we're talking about those two perspectives, if I'm sitting down with my conservative friend who I know, love, and trust, and I'm sitting down with my progressive friend who I know, love, and trust, isn't it just logical to think that they both could have amazing things to bring to the table to no matter what issue we're talking about, John? Isn't it just logical for me to want to hear the best of what both of them have to share and then try to combine through compromise and, combine and get the best of what they're both saying and come up with something new that, where everyone feels like they're being heard, everyone feels like their viewpoints and their worldview is contributing to the ultimate solution? That's kind of how I see the world, John. Am I crazy for thinking that way in terms of thinking that's how it should be?
You know what? You're not crazy at all, Scott. It's exactly how it should be. The challenge is, like everything else, you're swimming against the current because, like everything else, and again, I try to bring a different perspective, obviously, because Scott and I share so many similarities, yet we could be viewed as very different. I think that's what I love about having these shows with you and being able to have the healthy dialogue. I agree with you 100%. You're swimming against the current, and you're swimming against the current. Here's the problem from both sides. You get a unique perspective sitting down with both European American and African Americans and bridging the gap. You get to sit down with liberals and conservatives and bridge the gap. And I love the way you portray it. I have said for decades now, I'm not Republican, I'm not Democrat, I'm not liberal, I'm not conservative, I'm intelligent. I think for myself. And people get offended by that. And they go, what does that mean about me? I go, I don't know, you tell me. But if you're quoting stuff from other people, you're not thinking for yourself. And the problem in our country is, you just hit on it. People prefer to be influenced. I don't want to say educated, because it's definitely not education. They prefer to be influenced by media and by headlines, and we see it all the time. I mean, again, you know almost everything you need to know about somebody by hearing them say, I watch CNN or I watch Fox News. That's how pathetic it's become. And the reality is, I tell people all the time, don't watch either of them unless you just want to know why everybody's so angry and upset. And we witnessed it last week in the most sad way when you and I spent 90 minutes doing a radio show that had really great messages in it, and virtually, I won't say all, but virtually everyone that posted read the headline and then started the knee-jerk reaction of their perspective, their point of view, and then defended it so, we'll just say ugly, that Facebook pulled the post down. And you and I were like, you got to be kidding. Like, no one took the time to hear you and I speak. I won't even say we spoke intelligently. I'll say we spoke respectfully to each other, and we had a very healthy discussion that, it's a shame we couldn't have forced everybody to listen to it before they were allowed to post. That would have solved a lot of the problem, I think.
I think so. I wish we could have. That was definitely troubling, and it even got down to the point, of name calling. And the interesting thing, John, is that all of the individuals at one point were members of our Race Haven Community Dialogue, which is a private group on Facebook. And some of them have left. And I think, I know why they have left, just because this is hard work. And some people have a hard time listening to other people's views that are different than theirs. They have a hard time and, just accepting that some people are going to think differently, and they question their motives. And a lot of people have said to me that I'm very patient because I can put up with certain things. But I think it's necessary. I think everyone's voice needs to be heard. I think to myself, how can we have dialogue about race in America if it's only being had amongst other people that are the same race as you? Like, if we have racial tension and we have racial issues, I would think that you would have to speak to people of a diverse racial, makeup in order to really solve the problem. If I'm only speaking to, African Americans about race issues in America, how can that solve anything? How can that solve anything where historically the tension between European Americans and African Americans for obvious reasons, is been there, is much better, but it's still an undercurrent of tension, in our society. And I believe very firmly that the only way that we change that is if we talk to each other, because ultimately we all want the same things in life. We all want peace and happiness, and we want to be able to pursue, happiness. So we want safety, we want peace, and the ability to pursue happiness. And, I had someone recently come to the group who was introduced to the podcast concept, and, she visited the page on Facebook, and she made the comment. She said, is it integrated? And she's an African-American woman, and I think that, when she saw the picture with John and me, she was concerned, and she said, I just think that, we as African-Americans have our own issues that we need to deal with first before we start talking to other people. And I just had to respectfully tell her I respect her position. That's not mine. And, maybe Race Haven, it might not be for her, but I hope that she takes the time to listen. I said, I hope you take the time to listen to some of the shows. And I left it at that, because I know that there's that segment of African-Americans out there that don't like the fact that I'm talking, to John, or, I have other European-American guests in the past on the show. And, unfortunately, it's just, that's the way that I believe will bring harmony and peace and happiness to all of us. And I'm glad that you feel the same way, John.
Well, I'll tell you what, you make a lot of great points, and I'm going to cover just a couple of them to maybe shed some light, because you bring up a great point. We could take our society right now, and we could basically break it into a couple of groups that nobody would argue with. The obvious, you've got African-American, European-American. Then you got liberal, you got conservatives. Then you can bring it down to, even within those groups, you got radicalized, and you've got, lazy. And the reactions that we hear from people are completely, I believe 100%, I don't think there's any chance it's not this, that the reactions that we hear from people are one of two. One, it's an initial outburst from somebody who's just angry, pissed off, the radicalized individual. And I'm not even saying right or wrong. I'm just saying that they're just so angry they have to say something. And then for me, the biggest problem is that when that outburst occurs, you then instantly take everyone on the other side of your perspective, both the small minority radicalized that are already angry and upset, but you now add fuel to the fire to the neutral people that weren't angry, but now feel the need to defend something that they were not responsible for, guilty of, or whatever. And we see it on both sides. Now, the answer, I believe, is to find common ground. And to your point, there are people that say to me, why would you do this? Why would you? I bring it up on every podcast because it's real for me. Why would you get on a radio show and talk about race and politics as a businessman? It's business suicide. I said, because I'm transcending that. The world is not about making money for me. It's not about business success for me. And I think this is where you and I are 100% locked in, and people don't get it. This is not a white guy and a black guy, or an African-American or European-American, or a liberal. It's two fathers that want a better world for our children. Is that a fair way to say it, Scott? Because that's my whole goal here, is to take whatever abuse I have to take to get people to wake up and say, we're really not that different if we want a better world for our children, period.
Absolutely. That's such a powerful statement, John. You hit the nail on the head in terms of why I do it, and why, I admire you so much for doing it as well. Because like you said, a lot of people will say this is business suicide for you to get on and talk about those taboo things. But you said something really important. You said, I'm trying to transcend that. You said, I'm trying to transcend that. And that's so important, because I have people all the time, say to me, yes, Scott, you bring these things up, but it's just the way it is, or, people will throw articles at me about the way things are. And and the reason why I don't lose faith, John, is because I just have a firm belief that leadership transcends all of that. Literally, leadership transcends reality. It takes strong-minded and strong-willed individuals, some would say stubborn, individuals, to step up and say, you know what, yes, I understand the reality of what we see today, but I have a vision for seeing something different. And I think that's the driving force behind both of us and why we don't mind, taking those arrows or those shots because, we have a vision for our kids and our grandkids that if we can create an environment where people are willing to come together and find common ground, then, like you said, our kids and our grandkids will live in America, an America that is so much greater and better than it is today. And isn't that the legacy of our country? Isn't that the legacy of the world where every generation progresses and gets better than the previous generation? Well, all the work hasn't been done yet. Just because things have been done in terms of race relations and bills have been passed, like the Civil Rights Bill, and marches have been had, et cetera, well, the work's not done. Now we got to get into some of this subconscious and some of these, nuanced issues that may be hidden and things like that. So, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about today as well. So I appreciate it, John, and I want to take that and, transition to our next topic and just tell our listeners, we wanted to start out with that just because, we've been hearing it a lot. We've been seeing a lot of, a lot of things out there that might sway some individuals, but John and I are standing strong, and we're saying, we're here, and we have a mission, and we appreciate all of you for listening and sharing and spreading this vision as well. With that being said, we're going to transition into talking about something that John and I also spoke about offline briefly when we heard about the new Roots series coming out. And the History Channel remade the 1970s Roots series that was written, a book that was written by Alex Haley, and then a production was done that was put on national TV in the 70s that was really groundbreaking because it was groundbreaking for African Americans and European Americans and all Americans. And let me just say this, because I am aware that there's other people in this country other than African Americans and European Americans. However, I am very deliberate, and John and I are very deliberate in understanding that because of the history of this country, we speak to the racial tension between African Americans and European Americans because of the history of this country, which Roots speaks to. So when Roots came out, it put African Americans in a position where they wanted to really do the research and find their roots and kind of open their minds to realizing, you know what, it didn't start for us just here on this country. It didn't start for us with just slavery. We were enslaved, and our ancestors were captured, and enslaved and brought over to this country. So, and it inspired a lot of African Americans to do the research to find out their roots. And for European Americans, it really gave a lot of them insight into how slavery actually was, aside from maybe just some stories they may have heard in textbooks, which doesn't go as deep as the movie and the book went. So it was a great opportunity for Americans of all races to just broaden their perspective on the slave trade and the enslavement of Africans in this country. So with that being said, there was also a lot of concern out there. I know that, John, you were the first person, John, to actually bring it to my attention because I don't watch much TV, and I wasn't even really aware when you first brought it up to me that Roots was was even coming back out. But I could tell you when I found out, and John made me aware, and then I realized it from some other people who I follow on Facebook, one of which has been a guest on this show, Dr. Kelly Carter Jackson, and she actually was a contributor to the History Channel, and she was actually on the show when they summarized what it was all going to be about. She was on the History Channel as one of the speakers, and she's on episode 10 of Race Haven. So with following them and reading some articles, I started to get excited because I love history. However, I heard the backlash from other individuals, most notably in the media and as a public figure, Snoop Dogg, where he said that, these type of movies are put out there just to, torment African Americans, as I'm summarizing, what he said, to torment African Americans, and his feelings were that, there's positive images of African Americans. Why do we have to keep putting out all these slave movies that just show us enslaved and, powerless and discriminated against? Let's talk about the positive stuff. And I think, John, when you initially came to me, John, you had a similar concern in terms of, will this rip off an old wound? Will this, push some of the wrong people to have some of the wrong reactions, to the emotions that come with this show? Is that accurate, John?
Absolutely. In fact, Scott, I'll make it clear to everybody that's listening. as a European American, as a white guy, it's offensive to me to watch that. There's no words. It's disgusting. It's a horrible, horrible piece of our history that there's nothing good that comes from it. I mean, when I say nothing good, meaning the actual acts, obviously the history and learning and not repeating it. But when you watch that, I don't know how you don't get filled with an anger or a rage. And I'm saying that as a white guy. So I could only imagine anybody, let alone somebody who's already really angry, really pissed off at the world for whatever reason, legitimate, not legitimate, to watch that, it can only add what I call fuel to the fire, which then, again, we already have enough challenges in our society. We have enough issues. I mean, Lord heaven's sake, we just had the mass shooting in Orlando, just senseless, stupid violence that when I heard Roots was going to be rerun on Memorial Day weekend, I thought, oh, my God, Scott, we have got to have some type of a dialogue because there needs to be a healthy way for everybody to communicate, to share their thoughts, to share their feelings, to share their views, and have it in a healthy, constructive way. I mean, you and I are the first people to laugh if people, even remotely think that we just get on here to agree with each other. We've never once done a call where we said, let's just go on and agree with each other. In fact, most of the time, we have very little interaction before so that these dialogues are authentic. But I think both of us realized that had the opportunity to go out there and really polarize people, and that was a fear of mine because the only goal I have is how do we acknowledge all of the stuff that went wrong in the past, acknowledge where we are today, which hopefully most people would feel that we're better than we were in the past, but at the same time lead together towards a very, very healthy tomorrow. And, yeah, my fear was that this could potentially, for whatever good it could bring, it could potentially really derail, that motive and that goal that we have here.
Well, I can understand that. I'll share with you that I've been working my way through the series, and I watched the first 2 episodes, and I found myself tearing up a couple of times, and I plan on watching episodes 3 and 4 really soon, but tearing up because it hurts, for lack of a better term, it just hurts, and I think that's a human reaction. I don't know, if it's just because I'm African American, if I feel it a little bit more, but I don't know. But I know people I care about and love that will refuse to watch anything that has to do with slavery. I get it. I get the human reaction. It's too hard to consume for some people. I'm personally of the belief that everyone should consume it at least once in their lifetime because I think it gives them, it grounds them in our history. I think maybe in high school, everyone should take it in. I think it'd be a great thing, especially if you had the right preparation and the right support in terms of counselors and educators who are willing to, have a group dialogue and let the children vent the way they need to vent, let them ask the questions, maybe have a panel of historians, psychologists, and educators who can, really fill in some of the gaps and answer their questions and how to process it so that they can move forward in a healthy way. I think that that's needed. And with that being said, that is why on the Race Haven podcast page on Facebook, you will find a post where we did just that. We gathered historians who've contributed to Race Haven, as well as psychiatrists, and we gathered them, and we put together a post, and we asked any of our Race Haven listeners, supporters, who may want to, ask questions or, may want to vent and may need help processing what it is they saw, or even processing the reasons why they don't want to watch it. You can visit Race Haven Podcast on Facebook. Just search for the Race Haven Podcast, and you'll find that post at the top. And just contribute your thoughts, your concerns, your questions, your authentic feelings. And we have some really good psychiatrists and historians that will help fill in the blanks and do just that for us as adults. But you also can send your teenagers, your college students, whoever you want, who are watching this series. Over time, it's always going to be there on demand and on DVRs, and it's always going to be on Facebook, so you can find it at any time at the Race Haven Podcast Facebook page. But that's why that is there, because we need to start doing things, in a smart way. and being proactive about understanding that we are humans and we have emotions, and we need to address them and not push, things under the carpet. So, John I appreciate you being a catalyst, for that, John, for, bringing about that initiative.
Well, you're very welcome. And again, it's just one of those things. And I apologize. I was interrupting you while we were talking, because I was saying, yep, that's the key right there. Not just showing it to somebody, knowing that there's going to be a reaction, but preparing them. And again, I really want to stress this. We could take this away from Roots, and I'll give you another personal one for me. Watching the Mel Gibson version of The Passion of the Christ, I literally couldn't stomach watching, the scene when Jesus was being crucified. And see, the whole point is, whether you believe in Jesus or not, when you watch that, just as a human being with basic core values, it should absolutely create nothing but negative feelings inside. To see any human being mistreated at any level like that can't be a positive feeling. It has to be something negative, or else your programming, your wiring is just off, because that's what we're made of. Our core should be peace, harmony, and love, and then somehow that wiring gets bad. But that to me, that's what it was, Scott. I grew up Catholic. As I said on a previous podcast, I've become much more spiritual and less religious for various reasons because of, the divisiveness of different churches. But to me, that's what Roots, it's how I perceived any African American that was watching it to be feeling as I did watching, that Mel Gibson movie.
Again, I appreciate your thoughts and contributions on that, John, and I encourage any one of our listeners who would be interested in engaging in dialogue on Roots. We have some awesome historians, again, who actually contributed to this series. They're also writing a book on Roots. Dr. Kelly, as well as Dr. Erica Ball, who's there as well. They both were collaborating on a book on the Roots series. So visit our Race Haven podcast page to take advantage of that. The next thing I want to discuss, John, is I put together a blog post on the Race Haven podcast page, and then I shared it to my other pages as well, including our Race Haven community dialogue, and got a lot of people talking. And it was one of those things that, again, I think would make for a great conversation for you and I, as well as our listeners. And just as a little context, I was reading a few articles, and it just reading a few articles and processing the tone of race relations in America, and it just sparked about this feeling inside of me, and basically that feeling is that I really feel like I hear this sentiment for African Americans who are, let's say, historically conscious and who want to bring up things in the past or speak to some of the inequalities in the past. I get a sense of get over it, and a sense of, why are you complaining you weren't there? And it's no excuse for anything, so you're using it as an excuse, or you're playing a victim. Like, I've heard all these things, I've read all these things on social media, and it bothers me, to be quite honest. It bothers me when I hear those things. And so I was reading this one article about, the housing situation in this country and schools. And as we know, schools are directly tied to housing. And when people say they want to find a quote-unquote good school, most of the time that's going to be in a place where you have quote-unquote good housing, people who own homes, and, middle to upper class communities where people own their homes. And so I was reading this article that was going into some of the historical facts about, the history of housing in this country. And when I read it, I said, I'm sure a lot of people don't understand these things. And I was like, I felt like if a lot of Americans, and let me say this, John, when I hear everything I just said, I know that people assume that I'm only saying that European Americans say these things, but I hear African American people saying the exact same thing. And let me also say this, it's coming from a good place in most instances. I realize that it's coming from a place of people feeling like, you know what, I just want you to win. I just want you to be successful, and I don't want you to let any of those things hold you back. So I understand that that's where it's coming from in most instances. And then, of course, we always have our, radicals who are mean and ignorant. So we won't address them. but for the people who mean well. My thing is this. There's a level of gravity that's missing, and I actually, wanted to write this post. So I'm just going to summarize just a few things that I wrote. And basically, I started out, the heading of it, or the title was, my request to people who say African Americans need to stop playing the victim is this. And I started out by highlighting the fact that statistics show that the typical European American person has 13 times more wealth than the typical African American person. Oftentimes, when African American people bring up these types of inequalities, people will say things like, you're just playing the victim, or you weren't around, during slavery times or during the times when all these inequalities were happening, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the income and wealth gap is really major, and it's a big reason why we have so many issues, because we know that, poverty in itself leads to literally all of our social ills. The majority of our social ills are a result of the illness of poverty. And when you look at how wealth is built in this country, John, would you agree that home ownership has been literally a staple towards building stability for families in this country since our country was created?
There's no question. In fact, it's been a benchmark for everybody as they evolve and move forward financially to go from renting to buying. And then obviously, as you've already expressed, there's buying a home, and then there's, upgrading what people would say your neighborhood. So absolutely, it's been a financial yardstick for, I guess, as long as anybody's kept score. Right.
And the thing with that is typically that's something that improves over generations. In most instances, it's something that's passed down. So it may not be the parents who were able to upgrade their neighborhood, but because the parents were able to own a home and pay that home off and eventually pass it on to their kids, and as the market continually grew and the prices went up, now the kids are able to sell that home, and now they're able to potentially take the earnings and upgrade their neighborhood and therefore upgrade their lifestyle for them and their kids. And that's something that has gone on, for generation after generation in this country for lots of families. So as I, read that, and then I read about the income gap, and then I read about, with understanding those realities about American, ascension, in terms of socioeconomic status, reading about the income gap, and then reading about the facts about the Homestead Act in the 1800s, which, to summarize, the Homestead Act was signed into law by Lincoln in May of 1862, and it remained intact until 1934. And well over 1.5 million white families, or as I say European American, but the article that I'm quoting says white families, both American-born and immigrant, profited from it. And then it goes into saying that by the end of the act, more than 270 million acres of land have been transferred to individuals, almost all of whom were white. Nearly 10% of all land in the entire United States was granted to homesteaders for little more than a filing fee. Now, let's fast forward. The number of original homestead recipients, between the time period of 1862 and 1934, their descendants that were living in the year 2000 was estimated to be around 46 million people. That's a quarter of the U.S. adult population, So a quarter of the U.S. adult population can trace their upward mobility, economic stability, class status, and wealth back to this one national policy that essentially excluded African Americans. So that was Exhibit A that I pointed out, the Homestead Act. And then Exhibit B literally picked up where the Homestead Act left off. And between 1934, right around the time the Homestead Act ended, up until 1968, when my parents were 18 years old, it says that white residents used Federal Housing Administration, which is FHA, insured loans to buy their way out of the projects. You see, because a little historical perspective, after World War II, all of these housing projects were built throughout the urban America, primarily the Northeast, for returning veterans. Where they built all these housing projects throughout the country, and the returning veterans, no matter their race, were housed in these housing projects, and they were working class housing projects. But then, as time moved along, the white residents were able to acquire these loans, these FHA-backed secured loans that literally excluded African Americans. And these FHA loans, it says The white residents were able to buy their way out of the projects and move to shiny new middle-class subdivisions. This subsidized home buying boom led to one of the broadest expansions of the American middle class ever, almost exclusively to the benefit of white families. The FHA's explicitly racist underwriting standards, which rated black and integrated neighborhoods as uninsurable, made federally insured home loans largely unavailable to black home seekers. 98% of these loans made between 1934 and 1968 went to white Americans. And it goes on to say that housing discrimination was legal until 1968. So even if black Americans managed to secure home loans, many homes were off limits either because they had provisions in their deeds prohibiting their sale to black buyers or because entire communities barred black home buyers outright. So again, when you see these numbers saying that the average European American family or person has 13 times more wealth than the average African American, my thing to people all the time is this, John. It didn't happen by accident, and it didn't happen because one group of people outworked the other group of people in every instance. And, of course, we're speaking generally. There's always exceptions on both sides. But generally speaking, in terms of policies that impacted millions and millions of people, this was very telling for me, John. So I decided to write a post about it, and here and what I requested, and actually I'll share that for the solutions segment for our listeners to hear my request of, and what I asked people, basically anyone who says that African-American people need to stop blaming the victim. I had a request of them, but I'll leave that to the solutions segment. But, John, I just want to get your comments and your thoughts on that information I just shared.
Well, obviously, the information is very detailed and in-depth, and the research that you did and the information you posted is, I'll summarize it by saying it's troubling. It's, for me, as a European American who grew up in the suburbs in South Jersey, there's not words to put into it. I come from a family, if you go back 2 generations, my grandfather on my father's side and his 4 brothers all served in the war. And when they came back, my father was born in 1944. So, Scott, exactly what you're talking about is how my family went through the motions. I mean, they lived in that quote-unquote housing. And when my grandfather came back from the war, he was able to move the family out. My dad was born. And the long and short of it is, they then had the chance to own a home. And, again, it was a very modest little home. He was one of 6 kids. I tell the story about my dad, and I say it with tremendous respect for him because I know how hard my grandfather worked, and I know how poor they were growing up as 6 kids, the son of a carpenter. He was basically a carpenter for his whole career. But reading that sheds a light on it that you don't get any other way. And so in response to that message, yeah, there needs to be an effective, and I'm going to use these words very, very clearly and carefully, there needs to be an effective way to communicate that message without taking the neutral people. And you and I have talked about this, when we remove the radical, polarized people at both ends, you have, good-hearted, intelligent people with the right, intentions. We've got to find a way to communicate this without then basically radicalizing and polarizing those people, because reading that, it sheds a light that doesn't exist any other way. And was it fair? Hell no. Does there need to be a way to create a balance? Absolutely. But yet what we hear from most people, and you may or may not agree with this, but is it's unfair, give me this, give me that. And what that does is it puts other people, again, right or wrong, it puts people on the defensive. And, we've talked about this. I don't know if this is the segment you want to describe it, but, I put myself in the middle. I'll say I'm unaware. I won't claim to be intelligent. I won't claim to be very educated. And so when I talk to you, when I talk to Montoya, I have a tremendous amount of respect. And I mean that sincerely. There's an awful lot of information that you have that you can share with me. But at the same time, there's terminology in our society that does nothing positive to help communicate a message like you did. It instead creates that negative response, that divisive response, that defensive position, and then that very powerful message gets lost. And the two that you and I referenced, and again, we don't have to discuss them now if you don't think this is the time, but the Black Lives Matter message was a powerful message miscommunicated that did not have the result that it was intended for. And then the one that, again, we talked about, white privilege. Again, I get the understanding of it after having the dialogue with you, but to just hear white privilege is offensive to somebody in that neutral place that now feels the same way that an African American would feel hearing somebody say, get over it. You weren't a slave. What are you talking about that for? It's equally offensive. So we've got to find a way to communicate more effectively, and that's one of the things that you do, and that's how I want to tie up what you just said, because you brought a very important message out there, and you clearly communicated in a way that it landed.
Well, you know what, John? That's what you just said. We definitely need to stick there for a second, because there's some people who are going to listen to this who are going to say, what? You don't like white privilege? Like, it is what it is. It exists. It's real. How can you? What do you mean it's offensive? And here's where what I want to say in terms of adding context to that. There's a lot of times where I'll post an article about quote unquote white privilege, and I've done it in the past, and I would say something like, great article, great information. I just wish they would have found a way to write a better title. Because in the title they'll say something like, why all white people need to stop doing this, or, why all white people need to accept their white privilege and shut up, or, these very bold, offensive, posts. And my thing is this: the people that is intended to will never read it, that is intended for, will never read it because you're attacking them. And I wrote something the other day. It was very similar. There was a very thoughtful post written in reference to the rape case for the kid, the swimmer out in Stanford. Those of you who are listening, I'm sure you've heard of that case. And there was a post written on Facebook that spread around pretty rapidly where this guy was pretty much attacking, white privilege. And he basically said that, he said, in his words, white America, this kid is yours. You created him. Rich white men have done this, that, and the other, making very generalized statements. So basically what I said, I posted it in Race Haven, and in the comments I said something to the effect that, I get the message, it makes sense. I just wish that, he would have worded certain things differently. And someone said, well, what do you mean by that, or how do you suppose he have done that? Because he's speaking the truth. And I will say that the gentleman was speaking a lot of truth, but he wasn't speaking the complete truth, because whenever you say the words white people or black people or rich white men, you have just labeled every person that falls in that category. And you automatically disqualify your message because it's not going to land properly because you didn't preface it properly. And some people may say, you know what, that's petty. Everyone understands what you mean. That's not petty. That is the level of nuance, the level of complexity required to get to solutions. If we keep speaking in these generalized absolutes, you will continue to push away the people that we are trying to impact with our message. And we're going to do a show on that, by the way, because this is something I'm so passionate about, and I'm trying to figure out a way to articulate it so that it hits for people. But words matter. John, you and I know in the business world there's a concept that says thoughts are things. Everything that's thought becomes reality, becomes a thing. Well, guess what? Most things that are thought, before they become things, they're spoken, right? So if the thoughts and the words are so powerful in our world, in our lives, where literally the thought of putting an airplane, a piece of metal, a large piece of metal in the air to fly, they started with a thought, and then someone spoke it, and that made something that seemed impossible happen. Well, I believe that we can literally think and speak harmony into existence. And one of the ways that we do that, John, is we stop with generalized absolutes. So the term white privilege in the situation that John was speaking to, and here's what I've tried to educate people on Race Haven in the community and on Facebook. I say to people, listen, a lot of people there are like me. We are like, I'm a historian in terms of the fact that I read like crazy. So I read history. I watch documentaries on history. I understand nuance. I read research. And then for those of you who are listening, I'm now Dr. Speed. You've heard John say, soon to be Dr. Speed in previous episodes, but I'm officially Dr. Speed now as of June 8th, 2016. My degree was conferred, and I'm actually really excited. A little sidebar here. I'm actually going to Florida to walk in graduation this week. I'm really excited about that. But with that being said, I share with you that I am a doctor now, and doctor of education, because I want you to know that I do research at that level. So with that being said, I also have to be mindful of the fact that everyone may not. Everyone may not. And that's what I try to share this with some of my friends. As African Americans, by default, we understand race relations at a different level because we live it by being a minority in this country. But for someone like John, who is European American, who is a part of the overwhelming majority, 72% of the population is European descendants of Europe, versus 12% of us who are descendants from Africa, who are descendants of enslaved Africans, that's a huge difference. So their worldview and the way they operate in the world is totally different. For John, in order to operate in this world and understand his place in the world, he doesn't have to understand the struggle that we talk about as African Americans. It's not something that he had to encounter in his day-to-day life. So when John gets hit with this concept called white privilege, and he hears it in passing or in hearsay, absolutely, I can understand and empathize with the fact that it may be offensive to him and others like him who are just living their life trying to be good people, and then all of a sudden you're told that you have privilege and everything that you work for is because of privilege. Everything you've earned is because of privilege, if that's how he's receiving it. Because here's the thing. Most people are going to hear in hearsay. They're not going to maybe take the time to do the research in terms of what sociologists say that it is, because I think John will agree that once he heard what it truly is, he understands the premise. He just doesn't like the presentation. So with that being said, with me wanting to work towards solutions and understanding that solutions can't be one-sided, I'm all for realizing that the way that we present things have to change. It doesn't take away from the message of what white privilege is, using that as an example. It's about the presentation and understanding how people are operating in the world, understanding their perspective, and understanding that if we want this to land, if we want people like John who are, as he says, neutral, he's just operating, he's out there helping people no matter their race, their creed, he's out there helping people, but then he's told that he's a bad person, or the way he perceives it is like white people are bad because they have white privilege or whatever, and as we know, perception is reality. For me, that says the message landed wrong. And the last thing I'll say, John, is when you talk about Black Lives Matter, I get it. I did the research. I'm sympathetic just by nature because I'm African American to it. But I also had to read the mission and the values to understand what they were trying to do. But for someone who's catching it in passing, and all you hear is Black Lives Matter, and then you get the polarized media viewpoint of what it is, and you have friends and family who may give you that viewpoint, and if they happen to fall on the side of it, of Black Lives Matter being negative, and that's what you hear, now the whole purpose and mission of Black Lives Matter gets lost. It gets watered down. It doesn't hit home with the very people that we intend for it to hit home to. So for me, as I said before, I'll never knock the mission. I just knock the presentation. And I'll say that lightly because I don't knock anyone who's working towards equality and justice for all Americans. So I love the Black Lives Matter movement and what it means, especially the core movement, not the polarized, radical version of the movement which some people have taken it to. But the founders and what they're doing and the people who are connected to them, it's a great thing. But at the same time, personally, and please don't take this the wrong way, if I was creating that very same movement with that very same mission, I would have chosen a name that would sit and hit better, knowing that everyone isn't going to take the time to necessarily read, our mission. So I just went on and on. I hope that made sense. I hope it hit home. John, do you have anything to add to what I just shared, or any questions for me to dig a little bit deeper?
I do. In fact, I'm gonna say this at the risk. I won't use the name, but using the Black Lives Matter, because I think it's an important message. When I say got lost, I mean got erased like it was on an Etch-a-Sketch. I mean it got buried. And we actually did a show on it. You had Montoya on, I was on, and we all discussed it. And ironically, I felt good at the end of that podcast, at the end of that radio show, that we'd actually made progress. That, again, I think you'll agree, Montoya and I are coming from different perspectives on the same issue, and he made the comment that, it may have been you, I can't remember, but somebody made the comment, what if it just, because my thought was, hey, why not all lives matter? And of course, you guys educated me to why it can't be all lives matter, but I think it was Montoya who said, well, what if it had said Black Lives Matter too? And I said, you know what, that's perfect. That's not offensive. It doesn't send, the wrong signal, and it makes people say, okay, I want to learn more. But then after that podcast was put out there was a comment from somebody, and again, I shake my head, and I'm like, what is your goal? He's saying John Costino still doesn't get it, with all this negative crap, because he doesn't believe the word to, T-O-O, either belongs there or would make a difference. And it's just, again, it's that whole get out of your own box, stop thinking from your perspective. If you're trying to communicate with someone who thinks differently, which is what Montoya did, he got creative. He added one word, 3 letters, and it made me now understand something that was buried to everyone, not just me, not just because I don't get it, to everyone. Yet there are still people that can't see, okay, we can make a difference if we're willing to be flexible. It's the same negative rhetoric. And like I said, I'm not using names. If he's listening to this, he'll know I'm talking about him. But it's not an attack of him. It's just a simple, we're trying to affect a solution here, which means we have to stretch ourselves. I have to stretch myself to communicate better with people who think differently than me. And that's all we're trying to accomplish here. So I say that to simply validate what you just said on this podcast and on every podcast, that it's the landing, it's the reception. In business, I've always said, it doesn't matter how well I think I communicate something. If you don't get it, we don't make money. It's my fault. So I have to find a better way, a different way, if it's 17 more ways, to communicate a message until the people I'm intending to receive it actually get it. And I can take business and replace it with, racial harmony versus racial tension here. And that's why I get excited to have these dialogues with you, because I believe that somebody somewhere is starting to get that we don't all have to be enemies because we don't think exactly alike all the time.
And I agree absolutely, John. And, I think that, I perceive well, first of all, let me just say that I want to clarify something where you said that it didn't land, or when you said 2 things. You said that Montoya added the 2 and he got creative. I just want to go ahead and say that, that's something that's been out there in the circles of people who discuss these things with explaining the differences. A lot of people have used that as an example, that it means Black Lives Matter too. So that's something that a lot of conscious activists like Montoya they've been using in the world of social media. And even I've seen some news articles that have added the 2 just to kind of help it land for a lot of Americans. And then I wanted to make that clarification. And then also, John, when you said it didn't hit with you right, Black Lives Matter, like you didn't get it, and you said no one got it. I want to just clarify that you're speaking to your circles of peers. I would say a lot of
Correct.
European Americans didn't
Correct.
get it. People like that you would consider like yourself, who are neutral, who may not be in the day-to-day race discussions, that are just kind of living their lives. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. And you know what? I'm guilty of the generalization that we've been talking about. So, yes, I was assuming everybody knew that I meant people, and I don't mean white people. I don't mean conservative people. I mean people that are just not aware. And to hear a statement like that, it just sends, look, there's always 2 rabbit holes. And when you send somebody down the wrong rabbit hole, it never works out. And I believe the masses are in the same position that we're referring to. White, black, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. We're just not as invested in the research to speak intelligently. And I won't speak for anybody else, but for me, if I don't know I'm right, I won't act like I'm right. I'd rather just say I don't understand, please tell me. Unfortunately, too many other people don't feel that, comfortable being that vulnerable. I don't feel the need to prove my intelligence to anyone. I'd rather be educated by somebody who has the knowledge.
Right, and that makes sense. So again, I hope our listeners, understand where we're coming from and understand that, with for me, it's always coming from a place of love. I will say things on, I'll post things on Facebook, on Facebook, on our Race Haven pages and my personal page that I know that if you don't know me, you'll take the wrong way. There's things that I post on Facebook that I always think there's a lot of people who don't know Scott that will automatically put me into the box of whatever box they want to put me in terms of my views on when I post on race issues. But for anyone who's listening to this podcast, who's listened for a while, anyone who's known me through any capacity in life understands that I love everyone. I love everyone, and when I share information, I'm sharing information not from a standpoint as I'm throwing it at you as a dart to try to hit you in the heart or bump you in the head. I'm an educator, and I know that knowledge is power. So with knowing that knowledge is power, I put out these things that some people may find uncomfortable with the hopes that it will educate them so that we can continue to navigate the world and from a position of knowledge. And I believe that's a part of the solution. The same way I believe that Roots makes me feel uncomfortable, but I force myself to watch it because I think that context is needed. And I would encourage anybody and everybody listening to this to force yourself to watch Roots, fast forward through the tough parts if you have to, because it provides a level of context that will help everyone empathize with each other greater. And the reason why I created this podcast and the reason why I wanted John to be on here is because a lot of times I don't think that people empathize with John's perspective, and I think that's needed. I don't think people empathize with the everyday European-American person that's not as invested in the research on the race issues in America. One, because they don't have to be, and that's a part of the privilege of being European-American or being the majority, citizen in this country. The same way if you go to Asia, there's people there when you're the majority, certain things just don't hit home with you. Or if you're in Africa, for example, okay, and you're not African, there's certain things that you don't have to deal with, and we can give that same example. So it's not, privilege now has gotten a negative connotation because, again, it didn't hit right because of the way it was initially presented. But I understand what it is, and I can use it with John because he understands that he does have privilege. And let me just say this. I've been one to point out there's certain privilege that I have, even as an African-American, in different spaces, in different contexts. So we all have, there's levels and there's nuance to everything. So with that being said, I'm very sensitive to the fact that for someone like John, who's an everyday European-American person who may not have grown up being aware of certain things, that his voice needs to be heard as well. And just the same as John is out there advocating to people in his circles, that people like me and my voice, people who are historically aware and conscious, our voice needs to be heard as well. And that's what I think is the value of Race Haven. Would you agree with that, John?
100%. In fact, it's funny because, when each podcast goes up, Scott, I know I'm sending it to a group of people that would not have found it on their own and that don't know you personally, and I get them involved. They may or may not ever post or comment, but they're hearing the message, and to me that's half the battle, just getting people aware. So, yeah, I agree with you 100%, and I'm excited, like I said, to play my part in whatever you see that as.
Awesome. Well, you know what, John? I think that's this is a great time to segue to our solution segment. This is the segment in the show each week where, we take a few minutes to offer up what we believe will be a solution to some of the things that we just spoke about. So with that being said, John, why don't you go first this week if you'd like to offer up any solutions to some of the things we discussed.
Absolutely. In fact, I've been alluding to them pretty much this entire interview or this entire conversation we're having. It goes back to just the basic of what is our intention. When I open my mouth and I say something, what is my intention, including right this second, right now? My intention is I want whoever hears my message to accept it, to actually embrace it. They don't even have to agree with it, but I don't want my message to cause a knee-jerk reaction or put up a defense mode. And so I think, one of the biggest things that we all collectively have to make the choice first and then actively, concentrate on doing is that if we're going to communicate either via text on a post or verbally, in a dialogue, that instead of trying to jam a perspective like the proverbial, square peg round hole, try to figure out a way to communicate our message so that the other person receives it. Because as you've said, and as we've discussed, a million times, the only benefit that works for everybody is if we can all work together towards a solution. And right and wrong does not exist. It does not exist in a solution-oriented philosophy, because right or wrong means somebody lost and therefore is no longer in that same mindset. So it's got to be interdependent, and it's got to be a mutually beneficial win-win scenario. So for me, the solution is when we feel the need to communicate something about the person we're communicating to and how they will best receive our message. Because if not, it is like rain pounding down on a garage. It's not going to hit the car. And if the goal is to get the car wet, then you need to figure out a way to pry open a window, a door, whatever, and get some water in there. And unfortunately, we don't do that. We just keep dumping water on top of the roof and wondering why it's not working. So my best offer of a solution is to just think before we speak, before we text, before we communicate in any way, who is it we're trying to talk to and what is our intention, and are we achieving that goal? And I guess the corollary to that would be, if it doesn't land, don't get pissed off. Don't get angry. Reach deep down, stretch yourself, and try to find another way to message it, because I think that's ultimately the best way we all find solutions.
Well said. So if I could add to that in terms of what I would offer up as a solution this week, it is basically the end of my blog post that you can find, by the way, as well as links to resources that I shared on the Race Haven Podcast Facebook page. So basically, I ended that post by saying this. So the reason why some people tell African-American people to stop playing the victim is, in my opinion, because they never truly understood the depths of which African-Americans have actually been victimized. So here's my request. Don't tell African-Americans who complain about or point out the historical inequalities that they've had to endure to stop playing the victim. Please exercise acknowledgement and empathy. Acknowledgement by simply saying, I understand why that bothers you. I understand that happened, and I can see why that bothers you. That makes sense. And then that's it. You don't have to say anything else. And or empathize by saying, I can imagine how hurtful that is. I can imagine how angry that makes you feel. I understand. I can empathize with that. And that's it. Save the conversation about all the wonderful opportunities available to them today for another time. You see, now that ends the post, and I want to just add to that, because I was having another dialogue in another group that I'm a part of, and one of the gentlemen there said, and I shared this blog post with them, and one of the gentlemen there, who happens to be a European American gentleman who's in the platform with me, he said that I understand when it comes to those situations, and the sentiment for him is that, okay, that's tragic, it's unfortunate, and it's sad, but let's move on and make things better for everyone involved. And basically what I share with him is, again, I know he's coming from a place of truly wanting to make things better. But what I tried to explain to him is this: leave off the let's move on part. You see, it's the get over it part that continues to be a problem, right? It's the let's move on part. I understand it's coming from a place of love and a place of really wanting solutions and really wanting to help. But what I'm telling you is, from a psychological, emotional standpoint, it doesn't help. If you want to help, just stand in acknowledgement and stand in empathy. That doesn't mean you have to stand in guilt. It doesn't mean you have to feel like you have something to do with something that happened years ago. We get that. At least let me speak for myself. I get that, and a lot of level-headed people that I know get that. As an African American, understand that those of us who are around our age and younger had nothing to do with anything that I spoke of. And in a lot of instances, even for people who want to say, well, Scott, there's still things happening today, I'm not speaking about the people who may be involved in those things. I'm speaking about the people who are truly solutions-oriented, the people who truly want to see things better. And what I'm saying is, some of those people are the very people who are saying the wrong things that don't help the cause. And a lot of those people are, say things like, well, I'm not going to feel guilty about things that happen, or, I can't change the past. And what I'm saying is you don't have to say those things. Trust me. If you truly want to be a part of the solution, which this gentleman asked, he said, Scott, what can I do? And I said, really, it's this simple. Acknowledgement and empathy. That's it. I acknowledge that happened. I may go back and do some research about that myself because, wow, I never knew about that. Like that level of acknowledgement, that's it. And I can understand why it upsets you. And that's it. So I hope that makes sense. And, again, I'm speaking to everyone, who's listening to this, because I have African-American friends who say the same things to me. They say, Scott, you're just making excuses, or you're giving people crutches and things like that. And I understand the mindset, and I got to speak to this because I have African-American friends, people who I love, who will not accept any of this stuff. They will not even listen to a Race Haven show because they've been conditioned. That's the trauma working in a different way. They've conditioned themselves to not even think about these things because it will impede them moving forward and achieving the success that they're after. And they don't want to acknowledge any form of weakness or any form of, caring about these things. And I feel like that's the trauma happening in the opposite way. But it's important for even them to not get mad when people like myself want to acknowledge these things. And all you have to do is, again, acknowledge it, empathize with it without saying, get over it, got to move on, stop using it as an excuse. Because here's the thing. We all know that we can't use these. Like, who out here is really using that as an excuse? For example, I say these things all the time, and I'm always bringing up these things, but has it stopped me from pursuing success in life? Has it stopped me from pursuing opportunity? Has it stopped me from doing all the things I need to do in life to be what I value as success? Absolutely not. And for most people that bring these things up, I will venture to say it hasn't for them either. Okay? So that doesn't need to even be said. All we need is acknowledgement and empathy. So I had to hammer that home. I hope I didn't, go too far with it, but I just wanted to really hammer that home before closing out. So that's our time for today. A special thank you to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to listen. I hope you got through to the end, even if you had to listen to it in several, drives, if you're listening to it in your car, or several lunch breaks, or however you consume the show. We appreciate you listening. And a special thank you to my my co-host, John Costino. John, thank you for being here again with me, partner. Briefly tell our listeners how they can connect with you and your work.
Absolutely. And again, it's a pleasure to be here. It really is a labor of love, and I enjoy it. You can find me on Facebook. The name is John Costino, JohnCostino. Email me, johncostino@yahoo. But the bottom line is I will be here every possible opportunity to share dialogue and perspective with you, Scott. As I said, it's for me, it's the common ground that I hope every single person listening has, is that they just want a better life, for tomorrow, for their children, for their grandchildren. I think that's what brings us all together as humans.
Absolutely. So be sure to subscribe to the Race Haven Radio Show and podcast on iTunes or Stitcher Radio so that you never miss the dialogue. If you love this show, please leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher Podcast app. This will help the show gain more visibility and listeners. Also, we want to hear from you. So please visit the Race Haven Podcast on Facebook and leave comments and questions under today's show. And also, you can join our online community, discussion community, dialogue community on Facebook called the Race Haven Community Dialogue. So if today's episode resonated with you, please, please, please share it. Share it with your friends on social media, text message, email. Let people know about Race Haven. Race Haven is a safe place for people from diverse ethnic, religious, cultural, and political backgrounds to bring their race-based perspectives, questions, assumptions, frustrations, and experiences to engage in thoughtful, honest dialogue in an effort to transcend race in America. Remember, we are all smarter when we think together. Peace.
This episode of Race Haven was sponsored by Premium Outsourced Apps. Do you have an idea for the next big web or mobile app, but you don't have coding skills? Are you a business owner that is looking to elevate your brand by creating a mobile app for your customers? Premium Outsourced Apps offers superior apps at superior prices by combining a team of American-based project managers with talented and experienced engineers from overseas. Visit premiumoutsourceapps.com today to learn about our 50% less guarantee.
Thanks for listening to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast. Be sure to visit www.racehavenblog.com to comment and learn more.
Run to Old Navy to celebrate summer style your way. Now through Tuesday, rush in for $2 tanks for women and girls, $4 tees for the whole family, $6 graphic tees, and $8 shorts. Ready to dive in? All swimwear is 50% off. Save big on the best summer styles for just $2, $4, $6, and $8 now through Tuesday. Plus, this Friday only, women's dresses are just $10. Run to Old Navy. Valid 6/22 to 6/28. Dresses valid 6/24. Select styles. Exclusions apply. See store for details.
Hey, it's Flo, and this is my impression of a drill instructor directing a musical. 10 hot! Get those tap heels in line and let me see those jazz hands! Are you bundling your home and auto insurance through Progressive? Can you hear me through those sequins?
Bundle your home and auto through Progressive and save.
Left, 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 and step ball change.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company affiliates. Home insurance provided and serviced by other select insurers.
When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers. Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figure it out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Offers require port and of number not currently active on T-Mobile network. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 40p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.
When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers. Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figure it out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Offers require port and of number not currently active on T-Mobile network. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 40p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.